It is a foggy day in the volcanoes of North Japan. A perfect day, perhaps, for a horror story. The horror story that I'm going to talk to you about today is not one with Tengu, Oni, or even Kappa dragging people to a watery death. No, we have a tale of group harassment, of a public shaming, of doxing, of stalking, of the destruction of someone's livelihood. Yeah, so it's much more realistic and more terrifying. I'm particularly drawn to the story because it involves a foreign guide working in Japan, which I also am. This horror story took place on the night of May 23rd at Yasaka Shrine in the heart of Kyoto. Yasaka Shrine is right next to the Gion district, famous for geisha, and also now a really huge hub of tourism. Now on that night, a young British guide, a 32-year-old man from Birmingham, was guiding 4 elderly Europeans on one of his walking tours that apparently he had been conducting for some time. And he was there in the Yasaka Shrine. Now in this 1,000-year-old shrine, as with other shrines, the general protocol would be to throw some coins in, if you like, ring the bell, and then do 2 bows, 2 claps, and bow again. However, one of the guests who the British young man was guiding apparently rang the bell too vigorously, which is apparently something of a trend that's been happening occasionally with some tourists, much to the chagrin of locals. And a local Japanese woman took offense to this and followed them around and apparently was scolding them for this poor behavior. It appears that they initially apologized and began to leave the shrine, but she continued to follow them and say things to them. She then also started filming the guys, and so what we know from the footage that she posted herself on Twitter, which is how this whole thing exploded and became the mess that it is right now, the real horror story for the people involved, is first of all, an elderly, I don't know, German, some sort of older European man saying, enough, enough, you know, leave me alone, you know. So apparently she'd been following him for some time. He was just like, leave me alone. And then the British guy, the guide, trying to intervene and saying, do you speak English? Do you speak English? Do you speak English? Which a lot of people have taken offense at. And to be fair, it's not a good look. The guy speaks Japanese. But again, let's leave that aside. He was saying, do you speak English to this Japanese woman who was following them around and by all accounts, perhaps harassing them. And then he then actually switched into Japanese and said, Eigo hanasemasu ka? And she's like, oh, you speak Japanese, see? And plus there's like a Google translation app. Why do I need to speak English? Isn't it discrimination for you to demand that I speak English? This is Japan. And, you know, fair enough, but he's clearly just trying to get away from her and diffuse the situation and make this go away. He was just like, you know, would you please leave us alone? And then she would sort of, instead of responding to that, accused him of being discriminatory for asking her if she spoke English and kept going along in that regard. And then he apparently then says, look, you're being very rude. And then she says, no, you're the one being rude. And the word she uses for you is omae, which is a rather rude term in Japanese. It's worse than saying a buddy, and maybe not as bad as using an expletive, but it's not great. And at this point, the British guy, who's clearly already stressed out, he snaps a little bit and starts using very rude Japanese to her. And he says a number of things to her in quite rude Japanese. And it's just like, whatever, we're leaving, get out of my face. And so this was not a good look for him either. But there it is, all on film. And then that's the end of the first film. And then there's another short film of him like walking off that she posted where he, again, calls her ugly and, you know, uses that same omae word at her and basically is like, you know, just leave me the hell alone, get out of my sight, in Japanese. Pretty rude Japanese. But fair enough, it seemed like at this point, heated words were exchanged on both sides. So this just exploded on Japanese Twitter. There were millions of views to these set of videos that the woman posted. And the woman didn't just post those videos. She continued to post again and again about how she had been, you know, insulted and suffered at the hands of this racist British guy. And people really responded. There was a number of people who found out who he was. They found his account on TripAdvisor. They found where he lives, where his business was registered. People were posting Google Maps links on Twitter, the photo and satellite view of his apartment, and some people even went and took photos of his apartment and posted them. So people were literally going to his house. He was full-on dox. And this is all with being called a white pig and a racist, and there were calls for him and people like him to be kicked out of Japan. I should also point out that this Japanese woman at the shrine had previously approached foreigners a number of times before, and this must have been basically for her the jackpot when she was able to provoke that British guy on camera into being rude to her. She must have been just overjoyed because she was milking that on Twitter for weeks. She still is, as far as I know. She was basically compulsively posting about this British guy for weeks. And among foreigners as well, there were a lot of people who really criticized him, even among the, as we say, gaijin Twitter, or the non-Japanese people seeing it, saying that he's like, yeah, the wrong kind of person to be guiding, a privileged jerk, etc., etc. But this is all based on an argument that we saw all of, at most, 90 seconds or 2 minutes of. As a result of him, arguably, yeah, it wasn't a good look. He looks like a jerk. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this guy. You know, I admit it, my initial gut reaction of seeing this British guy saying to a woman, do you speak English, do you speak English, was sort of against him. But what happened to him for being a bit of a dick for a minute and a half to a woman who, by all accounts, was harassing him and his group is just over the top. So what happened to him? Basically, after this doxing, where they published where he lived, photos of his apartment, his full name, all of this stuff online, is that he hasn't been able to leave his apartment. There have been sketchy people going around looking for him around his apartment. His wife is a nervous wreck and hasn't gone to her work. And according to an article that was recently published in the Sunday Times, link in the description, is now even just having like nervous breakdown almost, and perhaps taking anxiety meds. They have a 6-year-old child who is not going to school as a result of this. It's basically brought this whole family's life to a screeching halt, all over an argument at a shrine. I mean, yeah, even if he was being the biggest dick around and being really rude, therefore does he deserve to be doxxed, lose his livelihood, have his whole family harassed, and have people surrounding his apartment? I don't think so. One question that this made me immediately think is, how responsible is a guide for the behavior of their customers, their guests? And you can see in the little 90-second video, I'm not going to show it here or link to it directly, but if you Google this, you can find it on your own easily. But early on in the video, the British woman who apparently had caused the problem by shaking the bell overly vigorously sort of apologizes and says, it's not his fault, I was the one who did it wrong, you know. So clearly the British woman is saying it wasn't even his fault. I had one experience in this direction when I was guiding earlier this year. I was in that same area of Kyoto, in the Gion area, and I was had to stop by a little stream and a beautiful bridge to explain about the history of the area, tell a little bit of background information about the geisha. And my group was also older British people, and one of them sat on a bamboo fence. I didn't even notice. There were 15 people that I was talking to, and I wasn't looking carefully. And another guide, another American guide actually, who had a smaller group that was walking by, sort of shouted off at me, "Hey, off the fence!" And my initial response was, oh, and so I just looked at the guy who had scolded us and said, thank you. And, you know, the guy who was sitting on the fence had already stood up, and so that was that. But had the situation been different, had that person then come up and like started following us around and continually like not accepted our, you know, apology, might I have sort of in defense of my group said, hey, you know, leave us alone, man. You know, and if he used rude language to me, might I have lost my temper a little bit and said some rude things to him? Could I have then been filmed saying unworthy, bad, sort of lost your temper type phrases at someone else, and then been just smeared all over social media for being a dick who doesn't control his guests? It's possible, right? I can't say it's not 100% possible. I would like to believe that I would keep any sort of angry feelings from rising and be able to keep my calm, but you never know, right? And if someone was really getting under your skin, it could happen to the best of us, probably. I really think that no matter how awful someone is for 90 seconds on camera, they don't necessarily deserve to be absolutely destroyed and shamed for months and months and months. Even though, again, I admit my first reaction upon seeing him was to almost be on the side of condemning him, but upon seeing what happened and seeing the whole video a few times, I've realized that it's not fair to him to condemn him too much. Even if he was being a bit of a dick, he doesn't deserve what happened to him, in my opinion. What do you think? This does bring up the very real issue of over-tourism in popular areas of Japan, and I have to say it's something I'm looking at mostly from a distance, because where I live up here in northern Japan, over-tourism is not a problem. We still get less than 2% of the tourists coming to Japan come even to the region that I live and guide in, and so at this point at least, I'm not at all worried about over-tourism up where I show people the glorious Sanriku Coast, the national park up there, the new MCT Trail, this wonderful volcanic area where I'm filming this right here on a Sunday afternoon when there's still hardly anyone about, and of course a lot of the beautiful gorges, streams, breweries, all the different things that I'd like to show people up here. If you come up here, you're not going to be contributing to over-tourism. But okay, little PR moment done. In Kyoto, in Osaka, in certain areas of Tokyo, yeah, they are getting just slammed by international and domestic tourists, and it is causing problems for locals. If you just imagine the perspective of someone living in Kyoto and now say they use the bus to commute to work or to the store, and now they're just packed with tourists, I'd get frustrated too, naturally. But is this the tourists' fault? I think it's a small minority of international tourists that are littering or behaving rudely, and it's just that they stick out and it's easy enough to scapegoat them and blame them for all sorts of problems. I think, of course, that everyone that watches this channel is someone who I don't really need to tell about being respectful or not throwing away trash or any of the basically common sense things. Visiting Japan and not making an ass of yourself isn't rocket science, of course, and I'm sure all of you are good with it. And even in the vast masses of tourists, I think most people are pretty well behaved. I mean, the crowds are unavoidable in those areas like Kyoto because everybody wants to go to the same place. The inconvenience caused by everybody getting on the same bus, the same train, lining up for the same tourist destinations, that's unavoidable. But I think instances of people being actually disrespectful are quite rare. I don't see them very often at all, and I've spent a good amount of time in the last couple months in some of those main tourist hubs. And the most obnoxious behavior that I saw, to be honest, is just the people standing all over the place taking pictures. And as much as I think it is ridiculous that they put that big black wall in front of the Lawson to prevent people from taking photos of Mount Fuji, going there and seeing just how crazy it was with all the tourists, I at least have a little bit of compassion, empathy, understanding towards the feeling of frustration that the locals must have had to cause them to do that. I still think it was a really stupid thing to do, and there are any number of better ways to solve the problem of too many people coming and taking pictures. But yeah, there are a lot of people there taking pictures, and I can see how it would be really annoying if you're a local or having to drive on that road. I do get it. All right, if I keep talking like this, it's going to be more like a long-form podcast than a YouTube video. So please tell me what you think in the comments. Am I completely wrong? Do you have a different take on it? What have I missed? Feel free to tell me how wrong I am or if you agree. I look forward to hearing from you either way. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the trails.